Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Joy in Dementia. I have a really special guest today, and she is actually the first return guest expert, and I felt like she could speak to this topic. With Corona and in general, I think that there is a lot of crisis involved with our forgetful parents just because our medical system is not supportive for dementia. And so, for that reason, we as daughters of dementia and caregivers really see that we need to have a good plan for crises. And what I'm noticing right now as I talk with other daughters is that there is a urge, which totally makes sense, to move their forgetful parent out of memory care or assisted living or wherever they may live getting care because of Corona or because of care that is not quality or what you were expecting when you first moved your forgetful parent in for help. So, before we go on, I will introduce myself if we have not met. My name is Laura Smothers-Chu, and I am the CEO and founder of Befriended Heart, where I help long distance daughters navigate their parents' dementia. So, I would like to introduce my guest expert, Heather Suri. She is a nurse as well as a aging life care manager, also known as geriatric care manager. She is here in the DC area, and she actually joined us about a year ago talking about hospice and palliative care. So another area of expertise that Heather has is crisis planning. And we were just talking a little earlier that she's had a lot of families contact her about whether or not they move their forgetful parent in home with them, and the daughters are not sure what to do in those circumstances. Heather, welcome back to Joy in Dementia. It's great to have you here.
Thank you, Laura. I'm so pleased to be back and share some information with your viewers about how to manage this difficult topic.
Absolutely. Let's get right into the recommendations, Heather, because I know that this is a very emotional issue for us, especially right now with the pandemic. And so, what is your first recommendation for us?
My first recommendation is sleep on it. When something happens that is first giving you that feeling like you may want to remove your parent from a memory care community, usually something has happened. Maybe you received a tearful phone call, or maybe you received a phone call from the staff that something had happened, that your loved one was distressed, or maybe there was some change in their behavior, some aggression or increased agitation. Something happens, and it's usually very upsetting for the daughter. So when I get those calls, those panicked calls, they're emotionally loaded. So my first recommendation is to press pause. And work on that feeling, process through that feeling first before you make a decision. It's never a good idea to make a decision when you are feeling in crisis. So, you need to have that feeling. You need to reach out to a trusted friend, maybe a counselor, somebody, maybe a sibling, somebody who you can talk it through with, and then sleep on it. Often when I get these calls, I tell the daughters that I'm working with, okay, we talk it through, and then I said, but we're going to make an appointment to talk again in 3 days. And if you're still feeling like this in 3 days, then let's start weighing the pros and the cons and seeing if it seems like a reasonable thing to do.
Absolutely. And if it does feel so urgent that it can't wait 3 days, then I definitely agree with Heather and just at least get 8 hours of sleep. Because biologically, that crisis mode that we're in is a fight or flight type reaction. And when we're reacting, we can't respond. So I think you, as a long distance daughter watching this channel, you like to have a plan, you like to make educated decisions. And because of this survival instinct that we have, the fight or flight response is sort of like, okay, all of that goes out the window, and I just need to rescue my forgetful parent, or I need to, ease this pain that I'm feeling, right? So I think it's really important, as Heather said, to press pause. And I can speak to this very personally because, with all disclosure, I am working with Heather recently. We weren't working together when we first interviewed, but I was just so impressed by her experience and the fact that she's here where I live. I think it's just been really helpful. So I know that there was a particular instance, and I'll give you a very specific example, that my dad, towards the end of his dementia, he started to get aggressive, not with my mom and I, but with the staff that worked at the memory care. And I think what's super difficult for us as daughters is the complete change in personality and really thinking that we know our parent. And then, of course, being on this dementia journey, we know that there are things that change. There are things that our parents can do or now they can't do. But I think the aggression is very difficult for us to deal with, especially if our forgetful parent has never been aggressive before. And so I know that there was a particular time where my dad punched a caregiver that was taking care of him. And my mom and I were extremely affected by that, super intense emotion. I called Heather. I was freaking out, and she gave me the same advice, which was she, helped, she validated my feelings. She helped me kind of think through what the plan could be, but made sure that I wasn't making a snap judgment decision. So I highly recommend sleeping on it. And I'm sure you'd agree with this, Heather, that it's totally normal to feel this way. I mean, we're biologically structured to have this fight or flight response. We as women tend to try to take care of everyone else before ourselves. And so that's something that we really need to be in tune with in order to really make the best decisions for ourselves, but also our forgetful parent.
And it's especially hard right now because when your parent is in memory care, you can't go there. You can't hug them. You can't respond to that need immediately in the way that you've been accustomed to doing. And so that really escalates that feeling of helplessness that intensifies that emotional response that it is totally normal.
Definitely, definitely. So, what's the second thing that you think daughters could do after they sleep on it?
Yeah. So, when we come back and we look at the discussion again, when we're all feeling a little bit calmer, one of the first pieces that I think it's important to analyze is why was the decision made for your loved one to move into memory care to begin with? Often, not always, but often that decision was made very carefully, very thoughtfully, with a lot of time and research involved. And because there was a need, because it wasn't working well in the previous setting for a variety of different reasons. And so it's easy to again, look at the immediate problem and want to solve it, but we should not disregard all of um, the planning and the analysis that went in early into making this decision because most likely those problems are still there and they may even be more difficult to manage outside of a memory care than they were previously. So you don't want to jump from the frying pan to the fire. So important to really remember and analyze those initial reasons why you made the decision and see what still applies.
Yeah, and I think too, really remembering that dementia progresses, and unfortunately, it does get harder and harder to take care of your forgetful parent. And so if they seemed okay, maybe a year ago, there could have been progression that you don't know about because they've been at the memory care and those things have been taken care of. So I know that from personal experience. And also, it's something really important to remember is, did you move the forgetful parent out of their house because of safety issues? Was it that they were at risk for wandering out of the house or turning on the stove, or was it to preserve your safety? Perhaps there was aggression and they were hitting you. That's likely not to get better. Things do change. Maybe someone is aggressive for one stage of the dementia and then the next stage they're not, but the care is still going to continue to increase as far as changing the briefs or things like that you may not have experience with, and you also we just don't have the expertise that professional caregivers do. So
Or the team.
yeah.
There are shifts of people, often three shifts of people who are helping to support your loved one's care. And it's a lot to go home and try to take that on with just a kind of a handful of family members. That kind of brings us to this idea of talking about safety and whether that's concerns about safety in the community versus safety of bringing somebody back home, to their home or perhaps to your home. I have a lot of daughters that are looking at their own homes as, a temporary respite. So when we look at safety, I want to look at it in the broader context of, physical safety is one piece, but also emotional
Mhm.
safety for people living with dementia. Familiar spaces and familiar routines and familiar people, even if they may not know all of the caregivers' names at the community where they live, but they're familiar people because they're people who are involved in their care on a daily basis. When you take someone with dementia out of that environment, it's stress. And maybe in some ways it's good stress because they're home with their favorite foods and their loved ones and maybe pets and all of those things that we look forward to giving our loved ones with dementia, but it is still stress. And with stress, we may see a decrease in function. We may see some behaviors that are challenging. Sometimes being around family can trigger emotions that are difficult for your loved one with dementia to process, and that manifests in unexpected ways. So even though the intentions are good, I tell my families who are considering this to expect that there are going to be some very intense emotions as routines are disrupted and the environment has changed, even if it's for good reasons. So in terms of safety in the building, with people with dementia, there is the additional strain of social isolation. So we know that social isolation is bad for all of us, right? But we're hoping that the strain of social isolation is less harmful than perhaps contracting COVID-19. For people with dementia who don't have the context to understand what's happening and why they have to be socially isolated, the harm of social isolation is very real and immediate, where the risk of COVID-19 is just that, it's a risk. I think if there's an argument to remove someone from an environment, that's probably the strongest one. But it does come at a substantial cost, both for the individual with dementia and the family member who's making that choice. And there's no, right now, if for some reason it wasn't working at home, once you take your loved one out, you can't go back. So you'll need a backup plan, but the backup plan won't be returning to that community because in order to keep everyone else safe, you have then broken quarantine and they won't be able to have you back right away. And right now, at least in the DC area, most memory care don't know when they'll be able to start accepting admissions back. So there's a risk there too.
Yeah. Can you give an example maybe about some intense emotional behavior that could happen if a forgetful parent is moved from memory care, especially within like daughter and parent?
Sure, sure. So, in my experience, I've had people with dementia when they have maybe gone home over the holidays with their loved ones that they can get very frustrated. Sometimes they won't remember that maybe the home is already sold, and then they're grieving and angry all over again when they realize that it was. So I think that, that's an example, and then that escalates, and then the daughter has had that feeling of bringing their loved one home because of an angry crying interaction, and now they've got another angry crying interaction once they're home. So it's not a situation where it's likely, depending on where your loved one is in their journey with dementia, but it's unlikely they're going to say thanks for coming to get me and then everything's going to be okay after that. That's not a realistic expectation.
Yeah. And I think even so, let's say if someone's watching this video after Corona and we found a vaccine, another possible issue with safety or concern that we as daughters might have is perhaps the lack of caregiving staff. So I know for when my dad was transferred to rehab from a hospital, our understanding was that the rehab was very good and high quality. And we noticed that, especially because it was during the holidays, but I think in general, some daughters have this realization that there really wasn't enough staff to, take care of my dad and change the briefs and things like that. And so that could be another reason that you are thinking to move your forgetful parent home. So it's really important to weigh all of those things and really
Yes.
think
And that's a
about,
likely scenario, Laura, even in our post COVID world,
yeah,
because we have this experience. We have even a greater demand for caregivers than we have ever had. These buildings are spread very thin. They continue to see infections of staff or exposures of staff, which require them to come out and quarantine for 2 weeks. We see executive directors who have worked 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for months, and they're needing to take time off. You will probably see turnover in these buildings. So the building that maybe you knew and loved might have new leadership, and then there's going to be bumps and changes with that too. So that's another kind of minefield that we'll have to navigate with families. We will see changes in these buildings, and some of them are going to be frustrating, and not because people aren't doing the best they can, but the resources are different. The situation is going to be different. It's going to be different for a while.
yeah, that's really good to know. And I think so for that reason, and I think maybe I could have said this in the way beginning, but you know, whether or not to move your forgetful parent in with you from a memory care facility is a huge decision. And it really depends. Like, it depends on why they were moved to the memory care in the first place. It depends on where they are in the stage of dementia. It depends on if you are able to support them well enough in your own home. So let's get into that, Heather. If the daughter decides to move her forgetful parent into the home, what is something that they can research beforehand or prepare beforehand to make sure that we have a plan B if need be?
Yeah. So, first of all, being a daughter and being a caregiver are two very different roles. If you're accustomed to being the daughter, which I kind of tongue in cheek, I'll talk about, good cop and bad cop here. If you've been the daughter and you've been visiting at the memory care, you've been the good cop for a long time. You show up with presents and jokes and smiles and hugs. When you're the caregiver, sometimes things like bathing and incontinence care can be very stressful for your loved one with dementia. And when you're the one trying to help your loved one with that type of care, you're likely no longer the good cop.
Mhm.
And that can be a hard transition for daughters to become the caregiver. Knowing that your routine will change, to accommodate your loved one's routine. And that might sound okay, but it can be a little bit relentless, especially because a major component to being able to do this successfully is the caregivers, the daughters' own self care. So the things, if you were great at your self care before, that's good. Your tank is full, but you're going to have to figure out ways to continue to maintain your self care under very different conditions. Other resources right now, the good news about this is that a lot of caregiving courses, caregiving boot camps, and support groups have all gone virtual, which makes them more accessible than ever before. A lot of times, caregivers, family caregivers, weren't able to participate in those because they had their loved one with them, and that could make it difficult to travel or go someplace. So, I really recommend looking at the different area resources for caregiving boot camps, virtual caregiving boot camps, and support groups, making sure that you've really well assessed your own support system. So it's very difficult. I won't say impossible because people do it, but it's very difficult to be a one woman show. You're going to need other people, it's friends, it's neighbors, it's other family members. It may be paid caregivers to help support you, make sure that you have a break, make sure that your loved one receives the care that they need. Sometimes people do better with a professional caregiver than they do their daughter because your loved one may still think of you as a child or as a loved one and not be comfortable taking direction from you or having you provide their very, very personal care, providing incontinence care, providing bathing. So they actually may be more comfortable having somebody come in who's in scrubs who, looks like a healthcare provider. Keeping yourself open to all kinds of different options for making it work and staying flexible to know that if something's not working, you might need to change. And being open to trying different things to see what works best.
Definitely. And I super agree with what you're saying, Heather, about really trying to check out a caregiving course or a support group, ideally before you move your forgetful parent in, because I think it's really important. I mean, we as professional women, that many of us are also parents, like we want to make a educated decision about what we're planning to do for however long this is going to be. That's the other thing, especially if you are moving your forgetful parent in, because of this coronavirus or because there are not enough staff to help out at the memory care, you don't know how long your parent is going to need to stay with you, right? So we need to have that backup plan set up ahead of time. I promise this will make your life much easier. And if you build in that cushion, you can really understand what a commitment it is to be a primary caregiver and really decide, like, is this the right fit for me? Or would it be better for my forgetful parent to stay in the memory care? So I think these are really important questions. But as you are a daughter that likes to do research because you watch this channel, I highly recommend really researching these things and creating a plan of what that would look like.
I agree. The probably the most important thing to remember is and you may find this very annoying that I'm going to say this. There's not a right answer. There's not a right answer. There's not a wrong answer. Um, I think that there are benefits and burdens of this very difficult decision either way. And so I want daughters to know, no matter what they decide to do, if they decide that despite the risks of COVID-19 or despite the risks associated with staffing changes, or changes in the culture of a building, that they decide to leave their loved one in the building, that's okay. You need to make sure that you are taking the best care of yourself possible so that you can continue to advocate for your loved one. Your loved one needs you, and they need you healthy, physically and emotionally, and ready to go to bat for them. So, if what you need in order to do that is to retain your role as daughter and not caregiver, that's okay. We can work on the social isolation in other ways. There's other creative workarounds to negotiate with the building to try to ease some of the strain of that. If you are a daughter that decides to bring your loved one home and it doesn't go smoothly, that's okay. It never does. Even the best laid plans, it never does. Um, and then that was the right decision. It was the right decision for you and your loved one. And there's lots of resources and help out there. This channel is one of them, to help you get through it.
Definitely. And also give yourself grace. You're making the best decision with all the information you have at the time. And so I think it's easy for us as daughters of dementia, really trying to do our best to say, oh my gosh, I don't know why I did that. I should have done this, but that's not helping anything. It's not helping you feel better. And it's not therefore helping your interactions with your forgetful parent, because you are kind of beating yourself up internally. So I think it's really, really important to know that like dementia is so hard, coronavirus, and the fact that we don't get as many supports as we really need for dementia in these memory cares. I mean, just in general with the healthcare system, it's very flawed. And so we need to give ourselves grace in those decisions that we make. We really are at the end of the day trying to do the best for our forgetful parent. And the best way we can help them is to make sure that we are giving ourselves grace and are really taking care of ourselves. And I can speak from personal experience. I've shared this a couple times in this channel, but I had my dad over for a week at my house, and I wasn't even able to take a shower. You know what I mean? So we think that we will, it's okay, we can arrange our schedule and he'll be sleeping and I'll take a shower then. Like, it's really so much harder than you think it is. So again, highly recommend looking into hiring a home care company, or if you have some really devoted neighbors. I know actually when my dad was here, I had to ask one of my neighbors to spend time with him. So I think that's why it's so important to check out these support groups, even maybe join a Facebook group that is targeted towards daughters of dementia, just so you can get an idea of what to anticipate.
What challenges your peers are facing?
Yeah.
And I love the Facebook groups and the support groups, because it's one thing to go on a website and see what the experts say. It's another thing to talk with people who are living it, the day to day details, because that's what's really important.
Absolutely, Heather. And I think that's such a good point. And that's, again, like why I started this channel, was because I didn't want to just be an expert that was speaking without personal experience. And you and I both have personal experience. So we really understand what all is involved in being a caregiver. So Heather, let's say that there is a long distance daughter who is trying to manage working from home, her job. She's overwhelmed. She's trying to homeschool her kids at the same time. It's really hard to make a plan and deal with this emotional stress along with, the pandemic stress or worrying about the forgetful parent being taken care of. Is there a solution for women who feel like they have no time to like devote their most quality attention to making this decision, coming up with a plan?
Well, that description sounds like about 75% of the families that I work with. So I'm a huge proponent of working with aging life care managers. Aging life care Caregiving.com is a website for a professional organization for people who do what I do. So no matter where you live in the country, you can identify someone to help you navigate this. I think that even facilitating family discussions, and I've done a lot of that in the last couple of months for families who maybe didn't elect to do the move but really wanted to get everybody on the same page, all of their siblings, all of the spouses, and really look at the big picture and try to see it through multiple angles. We're really experts at facilitating those types of discussions. And if someone elects to have their loved one stay, we are happy to advocate for your family and work with the community in trying to find solutions to deal with the concerns that made you consider this option to begin with. And if you do decide to bring your loved one home, then we know who you need, how to help you build your team, where to find the resources you need to be the best caregiver that you can be. So I definitely recommend Aging Life Care Manager to help you navigate this issue.
Yes, I also recommend that as well. That's one of the reasons why I hired Heather, because I'm currently going through fertility treatments and things like that. So that's kind of another job in addition to running Befriended Heart. So it's been so helpful to have someone able to concentrate on that 100% of the time. So then I can do what I need to do and really just have another team member fighting for me and, who's fighting for my parent as well. So yeah, highly recommend that. And we talked about this a little bit, Heather, but if you could sum up one takeaway point from this interview, I think all of these are really great recommendations. What would you say is the most important?
The most important thing for daughters of forgetful parents is your own self-care. I know that sounds cliche, but it's true. You can't work from an empty tank. So get that good night of rest, do the things that you know you need to do to be okay. As women and as nurturers, we tend to put the needs of others before our own. I fall victim to it too. I have all kinds of kids running around my house who are not in school right now. So it's important to take care of yourself first. And it's okay to do that before you address the needs of your parent. It seems a little bit counterintuitive, but you will be a better advocate and a better caregiver if you focus on your self-care.
Yeah. And I like to say, I think that so many people talk about self-care that we sort of roll our eyes at it. I mean, even I did that. So I think it's important to remember that we can't function from an empty tank. I like to think of it as really a way of surviving emotionally. We need to eat first before someone else can eat, right? Because we need to be able to walk to that person to give them food. So I think that especially now when we're all in survival mode, just remembering that your care is the most important, especially the more you care for your forgetful parent, the more you need to care for yourself.
I agree, Laura.
So Heather, I know you mentioned the aginglifecare.com website. And if our viewers want to learn more about you, can they go to your website?
Absolutely. So I serve most of the Northern Virginia area, and the name of my company is Pathways in Aging. And you can find me at pathwaysinaging.com. I'm also on Facebook and LinkedIn, and I love interacting with people in my community and helping to problem solve with you.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Heather, for joining us again for a wonderful interview. And thank you all for tuning in. I know this is a really stressful time, and I hope that this information has been helpful. It's helped you figure out a plan and how to move forward in whether or not to move your forgetful parent back in with you from memory care. So I hope that you subscribe below, and I will put the links in the description that we mentioned in this video. I will see you next time. Bye.
Bye-bye.